18 years of loyalty, 18 years of dedication, and then one Friday afternoon, it all vanished with a single termination letter. But when she opened that locked drawer in HR's office, what lay hidden inside didn't just change her fate, it ignited a fire of revenge that nothing could extinguish. They thought they'd discarded another disposable employee. They never imagined their most dangerous enemy would rise from the ashes of their own betrayal. This is my story of how a locked drawer became the key to destroying an empire built on lies. My name is Melissa Hartman, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed in the American dream. At 42, I had built what I thought was an unshakable foundation at North River Capital, one of Manhattan's mid-tier financial firms that manage pension funds and municipal bonds. 18 years. That's how long I'd given them. Longer than my marriage lasted. Longer than I'd lived in any single place since childhood. Every morning, I caught the 7:14 train from Westchester, coffee in hand, laptop bag slung over my shoulder. The commute had become meditation, a ritual that marked the boundary between my small apartment and the gleaming towers of the financial district. I knew every crack in the platform, every regular commuter's face, every conductor's greeting. This was my life's rhythm. Predictable and secure. I'd started as a junior analyst, fresh from my MBA, eager to prove myself in a world still dominated by men in expensive suits. Over the years, I'd climbed, not meteorically, but steadily. Senior analyst, assistant vice president, finally, vice president of portfolio risk assessment. The titles came with modest raises, longer hours, and the gradual erosion of my personal life. I missed birthdays, canceled vacations, answered emails at my nephew's graduation. But it was worth it, I told myself. North River was family. The office on the 32nd floor had become more familiar than my own home. I knew which vending machine had the freshest snacks, which bathroom stall had the broken lock, which conference room caught the afternoon sun. My desk, third cubicle from the window, held 18 years of accumulated life. A jade plant I'd nursed from a cutting. Photos from company retreats. Awards for excellence in risk management from 2018 and 2021. I'd weathered the 2008 crisis, the COVID pandemic, 3 CEOs, and countless restructurings. Each time, I'd survived while others were let go. I was essential, irreplaceable, or so I believed. My analyses had saved the company millions. My weekend work had caught errors that could have triggered regulatory investigations. I was the institutional memory, the one who knew where all the bodies were buried. That Friday started like any other. October rain pelted the windows, and the office hummed with end-of-week energy. I was deep in a spreadsheet, tracking anomalies in our emerging markets fund, when the message popped up on my screen. Please report to conference room B at 3 p.m. H. Cole, Harriet Cole, our Chief Human Resources Officer. My stomach tightened instinctively. In 18 years, I'd never been summoned by HR. But I pushed down the unease. Maybe it was about the new compliance training or the mentorship program I'd volunteered for. At 2:58, I saved my work, straightened my blazer, and walked down the hall. Each step felt heavier than the last. Through the glass doors, I saw them. Harriet, impeccable in her designer suit, and Brad Morrison, my direct supervisor, avoiding eye contact with the wall. The room smelled of leather and lemon wood polish. Everything was too clean, too prepared. A manila folder sat on the table like a verdict. "Melissa, please sit," Harriet said, her voice professionally warm but her eyes cold as the October rain. The words that followed blurred together. Difficult decision. Restructuring. Position eliminated. Generous severance package. Today will be your last day. 18 years collapsed into 18 minutes. Security would escort me to pack my desk. My keycard was already deactivated. The company email, deleted. They'd prepared everything while I was working on their spreadsheets, protecting their assets. "Is there anything you'd like to say?" Harriet asked, pen poised over her legal pad. I wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to remind them of every sacrifice, every late night, every canceled plan. Instead, I heard myself say, no, because in that moment, staring at their rehearsed sympathy, I realized the truth. I had never been family. I was just another line item on a spreadsheet, a number to be balanced, a cost to be cut. The American dream I'd believed in was just that, a dream. And I had just woken up. The security guard, Marcus, who I'd shared elevator small talk with for a decade, couldn't meet my eyes as he watched me pack 18 years into a cardboard box. My hands shook as I wrapped the jade plant in newspaper, its leaves trembling like my own fingers. Colleagues I'd worked with for years suddenly found their screens fascinating, their phones urgent. The open office that had buzzed with collaboration an hour ago now felt like a morgue. Outside, the October rain had turned vicious. I stood on the sidewalk, box in my arms, watching taxis splash through puddles. No one had offered to share a cab. No one had said goodbye. The building's revolving door kept spinning, expelling workers into their weekend plans while I stood frozen, a ghost already forgotten. The train ride home stretched into eternity. Every station announcement reminded me this wouldn't be my commute anymore. A young woman in a fresh suit sat across from me, probably heading home from her first week at some firm, eyes bright with ambition. I wanted to warn her. I wanted to tell her to run. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the dark window, 42 years old, suddenly unemployed, with nothing to show for it but a severance package that would last 6 months if I was careful. My apartment felt suffocating. The walls seemed to mock me with their bareness. I'd never had time to decorate properly. Always next year, I'd told myself, after the next bonus, after the next promotion. Now there would be no next anything. The reality hit in waves. Health insurance, Cobra, would cost $1,800 a month. The mortgage on this overpriced Westchester condo, $3,200. Car payment, utilities, food. The severance that seemed generous in the conference room now looked like a ticking time bomb. At 42, starting over wasn't just hard. In this economy, it was nearly impossible. I spent the weekend sending out resumes, each one disappearing into the digital void. The job market was flooded with younger candidates willing to work for half my previous salary. Recruiters who'd courted me years ago now didn't return calls. One finally responded with brutal honesty. The market's tough for senior professionals. Have you considered consulting? Consulting. Code 4, you're too expensive and too old. The rejection emails came in waves. We've decided to go in a different direction. The position has been filled internally. Your qualifications are impressive, but... Always that but, hanging like a guillotine. 3 weeks in, the panic attacks started. 3 a.m. Heart racing, sheets soaked with sweat. The question haunted me, why me? I'd done everything right. I'd been loyal, dedicated, reliable. I'd never complained about the unpaid overtime, the canceled vacations, the missed life moments. While Brad Morrison played golf with clients and Harriet attended 3 martini lunches, I'd been at my desk, protecting the company's interests. My savings account dwindled with each automated payment. The emergency fund I'd carefully built was hemorrhaging. Health insurance ate through money like cancer. Groceries became a careful calculation. No more organic, no more brand names. The Whole Foods runs became Walmart trips. The wine became water. Friends slowly distanced themselves. The lunch invitations stopped. Former colleagues' texts grew shorter, then ceased entirely. I'd become that person, the cautionary tale, the reminder that it could happen to anyone. My professional network, built over nearly 2 decades, evaporated like morning mist. Then came the humiliation of explaining gaps in interviews. Why did you leave North River? Each time I had to swallow the truth that I'd been discarded like obsolete equipment and spin it into corporate speak about seeking new challenges and exploring opportunities. But the worst part was the crushing weight of the question that woke me every night. After 18 years of perfect reviews, of exceeding targets, of being the reliable one who never said no, Why was I the one they chose to eliminate? What had I missed? What sign had I ignored? The anger came in waves, followed by despair, then numbness. This wasn't just about losing a job, it was about losing faith in everything I'd believed, that hard work paid off, that loyalty mattered, that dedication would be rewarded. The American dream hadn't just failed me, it had revealed itself as a con game where the house always wins. And workers like me were just chips to be cashed in when convenient. 3 weeks after that Friday afternoon, I sat in my dimming apartment. I'd started keeping lights off to save money, staring at the North River building glowing in the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere in that tower, Harriet Cole was probably planning the next restructuring, the next life to upend. And suddenly, the despair crystallized into something else, something harder, something dangerous. The question was no longer, why me? It had become, what did they hide? Because in 18 years of protecting North River's interests, I'd learned one thing. Companies don't eliminate their most knowledgeable employees unless those employees know something they shouldn't. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 weeks after my termination. Sandra, a former colleague from accounting, wanted to meet for coffee. "There's something you should know," she'd whispered, as if the phones themselves had ears. We met at a diner in Queens, far from the financial district's prying eyes. Sandra looked exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes. "I'm packing up the old files from the 2019 audit," she said, sliding a manila envelope across the greasy table. "Found this in a box marked for shredding. Inside was a single page, a photocopy of an expense report with my signature. But the numbers had been altered. The original $3,000 client dinner had become $30,000. Melissa, there are dozens like this. All with your name, Brad's, mine. But we never filed these versions." My blood went cold. Someone had been creating false documents, building a paper trail for embezzlement we'd never committed. Sandra left quickly, fear written across her face. But she'd given me something more valuable than evidence. She'd given me purpose. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Harriet Cole's office. In 18 years, I'd been inside maybe 5 times. But I remembered the layout perfectly. The mahogany desk, the wall of filing cabinets, and that one drawer, bottom left. Always locked, even when she stepped out for coffee. Once, I'd asked about it jokingly. Her response had been ice. "Some things require extra security." The more I thought about it, the more pieces fell into place. The sudden terminations over the past year, always the employees with the most institutional knowledge, the new accounting system that only senior management could fully access. The external audits that somehow always came back clean despite whispered concerns about discrepancies. I still had my old files at home, boxes of documents I'd kept just in case. Now I spread them across my living room floor, looking for patterns. There it was, a trail of approved expenses that didn't match my records. Vendor payments to companies I'd never heard of. Budget allocations that disappeared into black holes labeled strategic initiatives. 3 days later, I returned to clean out a box of personal items I'd supposedly forgotten. Sandra had arranged it with security. Bless her, it was 6 p.m., the office half empty. As I packed the non-existent items, I watched Harriet's routine. She left at 6:30 sharp every day. According to Sandra, her assistant gone by 5:45. That's when I saw it. Harriet fumbling with her keys, the afternoon sun catching something small and brass as it fell from her overcrowded keyring. She didn't notice, her heels clicking away toward the elevator. I waited 5 minutes, then walked over. A small, old-fashioned key lay beneath her assistant's desk. My heart hammered as I picked it up. It looked like it belonged to furniture, not doors. The kind of key that locked drawers in expensive desks. I should have turned it into security. Should have left it with her assistant's things. Should have done anything except slip it into my pocket. But I was already falling, already broken. What was one more bad decision in a life suddenly full of them? 2 weeks passed before I found my opportunity. The company's annual investor gala was November 15th. The whole senior management team would be at the Waldorf until midnight, Sandra, now my reluctant ally, was still on the invite list. "I can't get you in," she said, "but I can make sure the service door by the loading dock stays propped open until 10 p.m. The night of the gala, I dressed in my old work clothes, black slacks, forgettable blazer, the uniform of invisible corporate workers everywhere. The building was nearly empty, just a skeleton crew of security watching the main entrances. The service door was cracked open, just as promised. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor lasted forever. Every shadow could be security. Every sound could be discovery. But the floor was dark, empty, lit only by the city lights streaming through the windows. Harriet's office door was unlocked. Why wouldn't it be? The valuable things were supposedly in the company safe. I made my way to her desk, fingers trembling as I found the bottom drawer. The little brass key slid in perfectly. Inside were 3 folders, each one thick with documents. I pulled out my phone, activated the flashlight, and began reading. What I found wasn't just evidence of embezzlement, it was a masterclass in corporate destruction. Emails between Harriet and Brad Morrison, discussing which employees to frame for fraudulent expenses. A ledger of offshore accounts receiving monthly transfers labeled as vendor payments. Most damning of all, a contract with a shell company owned by Harriet's husband, showing $15 million in consulting fees for work that never existed. They hadn't just been stealing, they'd been preparing scapegoats. Every terminated employee over the past year had been carefully documented as a potential fraud risk. Our signatures forged, our expense reports doctored, our reputations preemptively destroyed in case questions were ever asked. And there, in the final folder, was my file. Melissa Hartman, risk level, high, recommended action, immediate termination with standard severance, monitor for 90 days post-separation. I photographed every page, every email, every forged document. The evidence filled my phone's memory and spilled onto a cloud backup. As I carefully returned everything to its place, locked the drawer, and prepared to leave, I realized something had changed. I was no longer the woman who'd been destroyed in Conference Room B. I was no longer the victim of a system I didn't understand. I was holding a loaded gun of information. And everyone who'd pulled the trigger on my career was standing in the crosshairs. The question now wasn't whether to use it, it was how to inflict maximum damage. The documents spread across my kitchen table like autopsy photos of corporate murder. Each page revealed another layer of the conspiracy that had been operating under our noses for 3 years. The scope was breathtaking. $47 million siphoned through 17 shell companies, all leading back to accounts controlled by Harriet Cole, Brad Morrison, and CFO James Whitman. But the genius of their scheme was in the details. They hadn't just stolen money. They'd weaponized the termination process to eliminate anyone who might notice. Performance reviews retroactively altered. Complaints filed after the fact. Digital footprints carefully crafted to show a pattern of incompetence or misconduct. They'd turned HR into a disposal unit for inconvenient employees. I found my name on a list dated 6 months before my termination. Next to it, knows too much about Singapore transfers. Eliminate Q4. The Singapore transfers. I'd flagged those as suspicious, but Brad had told me they were cleared by legal. Now I understood why my questions had signed my death warrant. The evidence was overwhelming, but also dangerous. If I took this to the authorities, Harriet's files showed they had contingency plans, fabricated evidence that would paint whistleblowers as disgruntled employees attempting extortion. They'd thought of everything. Sandra called that night, voice shaking. Tom Rodriguez just got fired, 20-year veteran from legal. They said he'd been selling insider information. Tom Rodriguez, his name was on the list too, marked for Q4 elimination. They were accelerating the timeline, destroying witnesses before anyone could connect the dots. I spent the next week building my case methodically, every document categorized, every email chain mapped, every financial transaction traced. I created multiple backups, cloud storage, USB drives hidden in various locations, even physical copies in a safety deposit box 2 states away. If something happened to me, the evidence would survive. The pattern became clearer with each document. The fraud had started small: inflated expense reports, phantom consultants. But after James Whitman joined as CFO 2 years ago, it had metastasized. They discovered they could hide millions in the pension fund management fees. Bleeding money from retirees who'd never noticed their returns were 2% lower than they should be. One email made me physically sick. Harriet writing to Brad, "The beauty is, by the time anyone notices, we'll have terminated everyone who could explain the discrepancies, clean slate by year end." We weren't just employees to them, we were potential evidence to be destroyed. Among the papers, I found something that stopped my heart: a draft press release dated 2 weeks from now, announcing a minor accounting irregularity discovered by their robust internal controls. They were planning to get ahead of it, report a smaller fraud, blame it on the terminated employees, and walk away clean. The scapegoats were already chosen: 5 former employees, including me, who would be posthumously accused of embezzling $2 million, a fraction of what they'd actually stolen. My phone rang at midnight. Unknown number. "Miss Hartman?" The voice was unfamiliar, nervous. "I'm calling from IT. I know this sounds crazy, but someone's been accessing your old company files remotely. Your login was terminated, but somehow it's showing active. I think you should know they're watching you." The line went dead. My blood turned to ice. If they were monitoring my old access, they might know I'd been in Harriet's office, but how? Unless the key, Harriet's lost key. What if it hadn't been an accident? Paranoia set in. Was my apartment bugged? My phone compromised? Were they building a case against me while I built mine against them? I started seeing shadows everywhere, feeling watched, questioning every strange car on my street. But then I found the document that changed everything. Hidden in the financial records was a transfer scheduled for November 30th, $15 million to a Cayman Islands account, followed by the systematic deletion of all records related to the shell companies. They were planning to run, to take one last massive score and disappear, leaving the company to collapse and the terminated employees to take the blame. The resignation letters were already drafted: Harriet citing family obligations, Brad pursuing international opportunities, James seeking new challenges. All dated December 1st. They'd be gone before anyone knew what hit them. I had 2 weeks to stop them. The rage that had been simmering since that Friday afternoon crystallized into cold purpose. They thought they'd destroyed me, rendered me powerless, invisible. They thought I'd disappear into the statistics of middle-aged unemployment, another casualty of corporate restructuring. They had no idea what 18 years of risk assessment had taught me. I knew how to identify vulnerabilities, calculate probabilities, plan for contingencies. I'd spent my career protecting North River from threats. Now I was going to become one. The evidence was damning, but evidence alone wouldn't be enough. They'd spin it, lawyer up, delay until the money was gone and the trail was cold. If I wanted justice, if I wanted revenge, I'd need to be smarter than they were. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. Operation Scorched Earth, Phase 1. They'd created a monster when they destroyed Melissa Hartman, the loyal employee. Now they were about to meet Melissa Hartman, the avenging angel. And she had nothing left to lose. The transformation began in darkness. Not just the darkness of my apartment at 3 a.m., but the darkness that had taken root in my soul. The Melissa who'd believed in corporate loyalty was dead. What remained was someone harder, sharper, forged in the fire of betrayal. I started with secure communications. Tutorial videos on encrypted messaging, VPNs, anonymous email services. The dark web wasn't as mysterious as movies made it seem, just another tool for those who needed to move unseen. I created multiple identities, each one a ghost in the machine, untraceable back to the unemployed woman in Westchester. Sandra wasn't my only ally. Through careful research, I identified 7 other employees terminated in the past year, all from departments that would have noticed the fraud. Through encrypted messages, I reached out. Not everyone responded, but 3 did. Marcus Chen from Internal Audit, Jennifer Walsh from Compliance, and David Park from IT. They destroyed my reputation, Jennifer told me over a secure line. 23 years, spotless record, then suddenly I'm fired for regulatory violations that never happened. David was angrier. I found malware on the CFO's computer. When I reported it, they said I'd installed it myself. Criminal charges if I didn't sign an NDA and disappear. We became a shadow network, each contributing our expertise. David handled digital security, teaching us how to move invisibly through cyberspace. Jennifer knew every regulatory body, every law they'd broken. Marcus understood the financial architecture better than anyone, and I coordinated, planned, strategized. The first phase was reconnaissance. Using David's backdoors, he'd built them for legitimate security testing, never removed them. We monitored internal communications. Their arrogance was stunning. They discussed their crimes in barely coded language, confident their positions made them untouchable. One email from Brad to Harriet made my skin crawl. The sheep never look up to see the wolves, too busy grazing on their pathetic salaries. We were sheep to them, livestock to be sheared and slaughtered. I studied them like prey. Harriet's weakness was her ego. She needed to be seen as a thought leader, constantly posting on LinkedIn about transformational leadership and strategic human capital management. Brad's was his greed. He couldn't resist any opportunity to make money, including insider trading based on information from board meetings. James's was his paranoia. He trusted no one, which meant he'd turn on his partners if pressed. The second phase was psychological warfare. From anonymous accounts, we began leaving breadcrumbs. A comment on Harriet's LinkedIn post. Interesting perspective. How does this align with the recent vendor payment restructuring at North River? Nothing actionable, just enough to make her nervous. An anonymous tip to Brad's country club that someone was asking questions about his financing for his new yacht. Not illegal, just unsettling. Emails to James from spoofed addresses that looked like his Cayman banker, asking to confirm the December transfer details. He spent days verifying the bank hadn't been compromised, not realizing we were the compromise. They started making mistakes. Harriet changed the locks on her office. Brad hired a private security detail. James began working from home, afraid to use company systems. The predators were becoming prey, jumping at shadows, but the masterstroke came from Marcus's analysis. "Look at this," he said during one of our encrypted video calls. "They're not just stealing from the company, they're stealing from each other." He was right. Hidden in the labyrinth of transactions were separate accounts, each executive skimming from the others. Harriet was taking an extra 5% before distributions. Brad was running his own side schemes. James was preparing to run with everything, leaving his partners holding the bag. "They're a house of cards," Jennifer observed. "One push and they'll collapse on each other." We had 2 weapons now, evidence of their crimes and knowledge of their mutual betrayals. But I wanted more than their destruction. I wanted them to feel what we'd felt. The confusion, the helplessness, the slow realization that everything they'd built was crumbling. I crafted the first anonymous email carefully, sent from an untraceable address to Brad. "Your partner in HR has been documenting your trades. Check her locked drawer, bottom left. She's building an exit strategy that doesn't include you." To Harriet, from a different ghost. Ask yourself why James insisted on handling the Cayman accounts personally. December 1st isn't just your resignation date. To James, the killing blow. They know about Singapore, both of them. They're 2 moves ahead of you. Then we waited. The explosion was immediate. Brad confronted Harriet in a screaming match that half the floor heard. James locked himself in his office, frantically moving money. They'd stopped trusting each other, each convinced the others were setting them up. The company felt the tremors. Employees whispered about senior management barely speaking. Board members received anonymous packages with select documents, not enough to prove everything, just enough to demand an investigation. But I wasn't satisfied with tremors. I wanted an earthquake. Phase 3 would be public revelation. We'd gathered reporters' contacts, SEC whistleblower hotlines, FBI financial crime units. Everything was prepared, ready to deploy. But I wanted them to know it was coming. I wanted them to feel the noose tightening, to experience the same sleepless nights they'd given us. The final anonymous message went to all three simultaneously. November 30th, every document, every transaction, every crime. The truth always finds a way. Sleep well. I closed my laptop and walked to my window, looking out at the distant lights of Manhattan. Somewhere in that glittering skyline, three executives were panicking, turning on each other, realizing their perfect plan was perfectly doomed. The woman they'd discarded had become their worst nightmare, not because I was powerful or connected or wealthy, but because I had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The sheep had become the wolf. And the hunt was about to begin. The leak began like water through a cracked dam, first drops, then streams, then a flood they couldn't stop. I chose my journalists carefully. Rebecca Martinez at the Financial Times, known for her forensic accounting investigations, Tom Bradley at the Wall Street Journal, who'd broken 3 major corporate fraud stories, Sarah Kim at Bloomberg, whose sources in regulatory circles were legendary. Each received different pieces of the puzzle. Rebecca got the pension fund fraud, retirees robbed to line executive pockets. Tom received the forged documents, evidence of terminated employees framed for crimes they didn't commit. Sarah got the offshore accounts, the money trail leading to the Caymans. But I held back the kill shot, the complete documentation of their internal war, their mutual betrayals, the evidence they'd gathered on each other. The first article hit on a Monday morning. Questions arise about North River Capital's vendor payments. Subtle, professional, but with enough specific numbers to send their legal department into overdrive. By lunch, North River's stock had dropped 8%. Brad cracked first. David's surveillance showed him in Harriet's office, slamming documents on her desk. "You leaked this. You're trying to push me out before the December transfer." Harriet's response was ice. "Why would I need to push you out when you're already hanging yourself with those insider trades?" James, meanwhile, had gone full paranoid. He'd hired a cybersecurity firm to sweep his home for bugs, changed all his passwords, and started conducting business only on burner phones. But we were already inside his head, not his devices. Tuesday brought Tom Bradley's piece. Former employees alleged systemic fraud at investment firm. He'd interviewed Jennifer and Marcus, anonymously, of course. Their stories painted a picture of systematic terminations designed to silence whistleblowers. Stock down another 12%. The board called an emergency meeting. That's when I played the next card. From a spoofed email resembling James's personal account, I sent a message to the board chairman. "Getting nervous about the investigation. Harriet and Brad are planning to pin everything on me. I have documentation of their crimes. We should talk." Then, from a fake Harriet email to her lawyer. "James is unstable. Talking about making a deal with the feds. Brad and I need to move first." From a Brad-like address to his broker, "Liquidate everything, getting out before this explodes." They'd spent years perfecting the art of the frame-up. Now they were learning what it felt like to be framed. Wednesday was beautiful chaos. The real James called the FBI, trying to cut a deal. The real Harriet filed a complaint with the SEC, claiming she'd discovered financial irregularities. The real Brad withdrew $3 million from his personal accounts and booked a flight to Costa Rica. Each move confirmed their guilt while destroying their alliance. The investigators arriving at North River found 3 executives pointing fingers at each other, each offering evidence of the other's crimes, each claiming to be the whistleblower. But I wasn't done. Sarah Kim's Bloomberg exclusive dropped Thursday. North River executives' offshore network exposed, complete with transaction records, account numbers, and a helpful flowchart showing how $47 million had disappeared. The stock price fell 40%. Trading was halted. Inside North River, employees were in open revolt. Someone, definitely not Sandra, she'd never do such a thing, had printed hundreds of copies of the most damning emails and left them in every break room, on every desk, in every bathroom stall. The ones where executives called employees sheep, where they laughed about destroying careers, where they planned their golden parachutes while burning the company down. By Friday, the FBI had raided the offices. Agents carried out boxes while news helicopters circled overhead. Harriet was arrested at her home in Greenwich, still in her yoga outfit. Brad was caught at JFK, Costa Rica ticket in hand. James had already turned state's evidence, his paranoia finally serving a purpose. But the crescendo was yet to come. Every major financial news outlet received a synchronized package at 4 p.m. Friday, the complete archive, every document, every email, every piece of evidence, along with a timeline showing how North River's executives had systematically looted the company while destroying anyone who might expose them. The sender was listed as the terminated, not one person, but all of us they'd thrown away. The networks led with it on the evening news. Corporate coup at North River Capital. The executives who ate their own. Whistleblowers or criminals. The North River Three face decades in prison. I sat in my dark apartment, watching it all unfold on multiple screens. Jennifer called, crying with relief. Marcus sent a simple message. We did it. David was already fielding job offers from firms wanting to hire the IT specialist who'd helped expose the fraud. But I felt no celebration, only a cold satisfaction, like closing a coffin lid. Sandra forwarded me an internal email sent to all staff by the emergency board. Effective immediately. All terminated employees from the past 18 months will be offered reinstatement with full back pay and benefits, pending investigation outcomes. They wanted us back. The sheep they'd slaughtered, the employees they'd thrown away like trash. Suddenly, we were valuable again. I deleted the email without responding. There was one more card to play, one final twist of the knife. The company gala, the one where this all began, was tomorrow night. They couldn't cancel it, deposits paid, investors expecting answers. The interim CEO would have to face a room full of people who'd lost millions, explain how the company would survive, beg for their continued faith. I still had Sandra's invitation from last year, never turned in after my termination. Security would be overwhelmed, confused. Their systems in chaos from the FBI raid. Tomorrow night, North River's survivors would gather to salvage what they could from the wreckage. Tomorrow night, they'd learn that revenge is a dish best served in front of everyone who matters. Tomorrow night, the ghost of Melissa Hartman would have her final word. The Waldorf Astoria ballroom glittered with desperate elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast light on a crowd pretending everything was normal. Investors in their tuxedos, board members in their gowns, all maintaining the facade while North River burned around them. I entered through the service corridor at 8:47 p.m., my black cocktail dress unremarkable, my face hidden behind subtle makeup that aged me just enough to be unrecognizable as the woman they'd discarded 7 weeks ago. The invitation scanner was offline. Of course it was. Their IT systems were still being forensically examined. The overwhelmed staff barely glanced at my outdated invitation. The interim CEO, Patricia Stern, stood at the podium trying to project confidence. While recent events have challenged us, North River's fundamentals remain strong. Empty words for empty suits, desperately hoping their investments weren't completely worthless. I moved through the crowd like smoke, listening to conversations. Board members huddled in corners, whispering about lawsuits. Investors demanded explanations. Employees who'd survived the purge stood in shell-shocked clusters, wondering if they'd have jobs on Monday. At 9:15, I made my move. The audiovisual booth was staffed by a junior technician, barely 22, who didn't question the woman with an event staff badge asking him to step out for an urgent phone call from his supervisor. The badge was Sandra's. She'd reported it lost that morning. I had 3 minutes, maybe 4. My USB drive slid into the main system. The presentation Patricia was showing, optimistic projections and recovery plans, suddenly froze. The screens went black. Then, my presentation began. The truth about North River Capital. The first slide showed their faces: Harriet, Brad, James, beneath them, their intake photos from federal custody. The ballroom fell silent. The next slide. These executives didn't just steal $47 million, they destroyed lives. Then the names began appearing. My name. Jennifer's. Marcus's. David's. Every employee terminated in the past year. Our photos from company directories, our years of service, our final performance reviews, all stellar, all meaningless. Patricia frantically gestured to security. But I'd thought of that. The system was running on a loop, controls locked. They'd have to physically destroy the equipment to stop it. The presentation continued, email after email where they called us sheep. The forged documents with our signatures. The real financial statements showing the hemorrhaging accounts. The suicide note from Robert Chen, a terminated analyst who'd killed himself 3 months after losing his job, something the media hadn't connected to North River yet. Robert Chen, 15 years of service, terminated for performance issues. Left behind 2 daughters, and this note: I don't understand what I did wrong. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Investors reached for their phones. Board members stood frozen, watching their liability multiply with each slide. Then came the audio. I'd saved the best for last, a recording David had pulled from the executive conference room's backup system. A conversation from the day they planned my termination. Harriet's voice, crystal clear. Melissa's the biggest threat. She actually reads the reports. Brad laughing. She's pathetic. 42, single. Her whole life is this place. She'll never see it coming. James. Make sure the severance includes the standard NDA. If she talks, we bury her in legal fees until she's homeless. More laughter. The sound of champagne glasses clinking. In the ballroom, people turned to stare at Patricia Stern, at the remaining board members, at anyone who represented the company. The emperor wasn't just naked, he was covered in blood. Security finally reached the AV booth, but it was too late. The presentation had been streaming live. David had made sure of that. Financial Twitter was already exploding. Reddit had clips. YouTube uploads were multiplying faster than they could be removed. But I wasn't finished. As security fumbled with the equipment, I walked to the center of the ballroom, pulling off the wig that had disguised me, standing directly under the chandelier where everyone could see. My name is Melissa Hartman, I said, my voice carrying in the stunned silence. 18 years I gave to North River, 18 years of loyalty, dedication, excellence. They threw me away to cover their crimes. Security started moving toward me, but investors stepped in their path. They wanted to hear this. Every person they terminated was a threat to their scheme. Every life they destroyed was collateral damage in their theft. Robert Chen is dead. Jennifer Walsh lost her home. Marcus Stone's wife left him. David Park was blacklisted from the industry. I pulled out a thick folder, copies of everything, the complete evidence package. The FBI has the originals, the SEC has copies, the Justice Department has copies. Every major news outlet has copies. But I wanted you, the people who enabled this through your negligence, your greed, your blindness, to see it firsthand. I threw the folder into the air. Pages scattered like snow. Financial records, emails, forged documents, floating down on the crowd. North River Capital dies tonight, not because of market forces or competition or innovation. It dies because it consumed its own. It dies because loyalty meant nothing. It dies because people like me, the ones you considered expendable, were actually the only thing keeping it alive. Security finally reached me, but I didn't resist. As they escorted me toward the exit, I turned back one last time. $47 million stolen. 38 careers destroyed. 1 suicide. And 3 executives who thought they were untouchable. The math is simple. You cannot build an empire on the bones of your employees and expect it to stand. The last thing I saw before the doors closed was Patricia Stern at the podium, mouth open, no words coming out, as investors stormed toward her demanding answers that didn't exist. Outside, Police cars were already arriving, not for me, but for the board members who'd likely face charges for negligent oversight. I walked past them to the taxi stand. Just another woman leaving another corporate event. My phone buzzed with messages from Jennifer, Marcus, David, Sandra. Screenshots of the live stream, news alerts, the stock price hitting zero in after-hours trading. North River Capital, a 60-year-old institution, destroyed in 60 minutes. The Manhattan morning arrived gray and quiet, matching the hollow feeling in my chest. I stood outside the North River building at 6 a.m., watching as workers removed the company logo from the facade. Letter by letter, 60 years of history came down. The security guard at the door, Marcus, the same one who'd watched me pack my desk, nodded as I approached. Ms. Hartman, didn't expect to see you here. Just needed to see it end. Marcus. He understood. We stood together in silence, watching the dismantling. The news had been relentless all week. North River Capital's bankruptcy filing. FBI indictments expanded to include 4 board members for criminal negligence. Harriet Cole facing 40 years. Brad Morrison's assets frozen. James Whitman's testimony revealing even deeper corruption. The pension fund would recover maybe 60 cents on the dollar, better than nothing. But retirees would still suffer. Jennifer had called yesterday. A whistleblower law firm wanted to represent us pro bono, said we could receive substantial compensation from the government's recovery efforts. David already had 3 job offers from firms that wanted someone with his integrity. Marcus was starting his own consulting firm. And me? I had 17 interview requests, 5 book deal offers, and a documentary crew wanting to tell our story. The woman they'd thrown away had become the face of corporate justice. But standing there, watching the building being stripped of its identity, I felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Revenge, I'd learned, was like chemotherapy. It killed the cancer. But it poisoned everything else too. The anger that had fueled me for 2 months had burned through my veins, leaving me empty. I'd won. But what exactly had I won? My career at North River was still dead. Robert Chen was still gone. The trust I'd once had in corporate loyalty would never return. My phone buzzed. Sandra. Coffee? The diner in Queens? An hour later, we sat in the same booth where this had all begun, where she'd handed me that first piece of evidence. She looked older, grayer, but somehow more at peace. So what now? She asked. I'd been asking myself the same question. The fury that had driven me was spent. The woman who'd entered conference room B 11 weeks ago was gone. But so was the avenging angel who destroyed an empire. I don't know, I admitted. For the first time in 20 years, I don't have a plan. Sandra smiled. Maybe that's not a bad thing. She was right. I'd spent 18 years planning, analyzing, protecting a company that saw me as disposable, then 2 months planning its destruction. Maybe it was time to stop planning and start living. I walked back to Manhattan one last time, to the financial district that had been my world. But instead of going to North River's building, I turned toward Battery Park, toward the water, toward something that wasn't enclosed by glass and steel. The harbor stretched out before me, ferries crossing to Staten Island, the Statue of Liberty distant in the morning haze. Tourists took photos, joggers passed, life continued, indifferent to the collapse of one more corporate tower. A young woman sat on the next bench, typing furiously on her laptop, probably working on some urgent presentation for her firm. She looked like I had 20 years ago, hungry, dedicated, believing that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded. Part of me wanted to warn her. Part of me wanted to tell her to run, to never trust them, to always have an exit strategy. But I didn't. She'd learn her own lessons, fight her own battles. Maybe her company would be different. Maybe she'd be luckier than I was. Or maybe, one day, she'd be sitting on this bench, watching her old life burn and deciding what came next. My phone rang. An unknown number with a 212 area code. Ms. Hartman. This is Rebecca Martinez from the Financial Times. I'm calling about something different than North River. I'm starting a nonprofit focused on protecting employees from corporate retaliation. We need someone who understands both sides, the corporate structure and the human cost. Would you be interested in discussing a position? I looked out at the water, at the city rising behind me, at the young woman still typing away at her presentation. Yes, I said. I'm interested. Because maybe that's what revenge really meant. Not just destroying those who hurt you, but building something from the ashes. Something that ensured others wouldn't suffer the same fate. Something that turned 18 years of corporate knowledge into a weapon for protection rather than destruction. I stood up from the bench and walked away from the financial district for the last time. Behind me, the North River building stood empty, a monument to greed and betrayal. Ahead, the city stretched out with all its possibilities, all its dangers, all its chances for redemption. They'd created a monster when they fired Melissa Hartman. But monsters, I'd learned, could choose what they devoured, and I was done feeding on revenge. It was time to try something else. Justice. Maybe. Or perhaps something even more dangerous to those in power. Prevention. The sun broke through the clouds as I reached the subway station, heading not to Westchester, not to my old life, but somewhere new. Somewhere that hadn't been defined by 18 years of servitude or 2 months of vengeance. My name is Melissa Hartman. I was fired after 18 years of loyalty. I brought down a 60-year-old company in 60 days. And my story is just beginning. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate betrayal and ultimate revenge. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories like this and share your thoughts on Melissa's journey. What would you have done in her position? The conversation continues in the comments below.